welcome. My name is Patrick Dean. I'm the Principal and Vice Chancellor of Queen's University in Canada, and privileged to serve as President of the Governing Council of the Magna Charta Observatory. And it's in that capacity I'm delighted to welcome you all today to this pre-conference program. We have, beginning tomorrow, the formal program on the subject of universities engaging with society in turbulent times. This will be the 36th anniversary of the signing of the Magna Charta. I think it's 36 years since the Magna Charta was first proposed. It'd be 34 years since it was first signed here in Bologna in 1988. We've not had an anniversary conference in every one of those years, particularly during COVID when we've gone virtual. So it's especially wonderful to see everybody coming together in person for this anniversary conference in Bologna where all of this began. There'll be a more formal welcome tomorrow as we begin that session. Today is the pre-conference session, and I'm very pleased to be able to chair it and to moderate the discussion. We have essentially three sections to the afternoon's program each about an hour long. We're going to begin with our speaker, Brendan O'Malley, who is Editor-in-Chief of University World News. Brendan is a freelance journalist, an author, a photographer, a television documentary maker who has written about education, development, and international politics for 25 years. He was international editor of the Times Educational Supplement between 1998 and 2006. The following year, 2007, he served as a consultant for UNESCO in the first global study on violent political and military attacks against students, teachers, and academics worldwide. He is a former judge of the African Education Journalism Award and was recently shortlisted, not so recently, but some years ago, shortlisted for the Orwell Prize for Political Writing in the UK. So I'll hand over to Brendan, and then we'll go on to discussion after that.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me here to speak. It's an honor and a privilege for University World News as well. I should just make a small correction. That's obviously an old bio. So I think it's 40 years rather than 25 now. But I'm here to talk about University World News and to get I want some feedback from you all about what you would like to see in University World News, whether we're doing a good job of serving higher education and what else we could be doing, and to explain a bit about how we operate and how we can go forward. So I thought I'd just start by saying how University World News set up. I mean, University World News, for those who don't know, is an online purely. It's an online higher education, global higher education publication, full of news and commentary about issues to do with higher education worldwide. And it's set up, it was set up by a couple of dozen journalists who specialize in reporting on education, which all came about when some of us editors were on the Times Supplements, Times Educational Supplement and Times Higher, when it was taken over. It was owned by Murdoch at the time, and it was taken over by a venture capitalist, and in one day they sacked 50 out of 85 journalists, including most of the senior editors. And we had for some time been saying that they should be covering international issues much more widely. I mean, these were UK-based publications, and they actually wanted to restrict international coverage. And we had been saying that they should be going online because there was a lot of interest internationally, and education was becoming increasingly international, both at school level and obviously at higher education level, with international collaboration in research and in attracting talent and in international study abroad. So it made sense to have an international publication, and it didn't make sense to have one that was hard copy. because the cost of sending it would make it totally impractical to send it worldwide if it was going to be a global publication. At the time, Times Educational Supplement used to send its copies, sometimes it was £100 per copy to send abroad because it had so many job supplements in it, which was obviously impractical. So when we were turfed out of Times supplements, we didn't agree with their strategy, and we thought we would put our redundancy pay to good use and set up a truly international publication. So what is that publication? So we are online, and we aim all the time to provide in-depth, independent news and commentary on higher education worldwide. What does that mean? So it means that we're not in hock to any particular interests or organization. We're entirely independent. We maintain our editorial integrity at all times. That's paramount to us. And that we go into far more depth than other publications. We're not there to write short snippet clickbait articles. We're there to provide in-depth coverage that is useful to you. What are we trying to be? So our mission is to be a truly international source of high-quality reporting and analysis from all continents, using reporters on the ground. And there are some key phrases there, truly international. What does that mean? Most publications start off as being for one country, like THE for the UK, Chronicle for the US, and then they put a bit of international coverage in it, and then they say they're international. For us, being international means not being biased to any one country. It means having a genuinely internationalist outlook. It means trying to subvert the bias towards advanced countries in all coverage. So we specifically set out to cover the global south as well as the global north. And it also means, and this is a crucial difference, not doing it all from London or Washington, but having correspondents on the grounds in those countries who understand the context, who understand the issues, and are not putting a Western spin on it. We're getting the news as it happens from people on the ground, and that's very important to us. It's quite a hard thing to do. So we have freelance correspondents all around the world. Well, we're all freelance. We haven't got to that level yet of stability where we can employ people. But we have freelance correspondents who've been writing for us for years, all around the world. We don't cover every country. We try to cover as many as we can. So that's a key difference. And another key difference, as that's shown, is our commitment to covering Global South, and as shown by the fact that we have a separate Africa edition, entirely on Africa. And the important thing is that we have this really interesting structure where it's run by a sister organization, non-profit, based in Africa, with its own African board, its own African editor, makes its own editorial decisions. It's not us imposing something on Africa. This is very important to us. It's a genuine attempt to try a new way of doing things that isn't imposing the usual global power structure on journalism, and we're trying to do it from the bottom up by having African correspondents in lots of different countries who report to an African editor and African board. And so we have a revenue sharing way of supporting them. We provide, our commercial team works for both editions, but we give Africa a share. And that's how we that's how we survive. Why are we doing this? Why are we not like other papers, just the publications that just think of doing it the traditional way? I think a lot of it is because of who we are as individuals. The leading editors, we have 4 key editors. Myself, the global editor, Cornea Pretorius, the Africa editor, Yojana Sharma, the Asia editor, and Mandy Garner, the commentary editor. And we have former Africa editor Sharon Dell and former global editor Karen McGregor, who stand in for us as well. And we're all people who have a lot of experience in different countries reporting on development. My first job abroad when I was a young reporter was in the famine camps in Sudan with the refugees from Tigray, watching them come in on the lorries, not all of them surviving for the next day. It really was a marking experience for me in my life. And I went on to make that year many documentaries in different developing countries on community integrated development in the poorest communities in these countries. So I got a strong sense, and I've built that into my work ever since when I was international editor at TES. I built in focus on education for all. I used my sabbaticals to do research projects for UNESCO. And then when I left TES, I went on to spend about 7, 8, 9 years researching attacks on education, the bombing of schools, the assassination of teachers, the persecution of academics, and wrote the first 3 global studies on that for UNESCO and the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack. So it just gives you an idea. We're, you know, and you know, Yojana has worked all over the world. She was a correspondent in Hong Kong, in Germany, in Latin America, as well as being Asian herself, having been born in India. She has vast experience of higher education around the world. It's probably the most knowledgeable of all of us. And so just to give you an idea, but you know, we are people who are committed to a genuinely internationalist approach into international collaboration, and we see higher education through that lens rather than through the lens of one country. I was a judge of the African Education Journalism Year Awards many years ago, about 20 years ago now, and was very struck then by the challenges of reporting in developing countries, that the standards were very low. There were some great stories that they were doing, but the way they were doing them was not the standards that we had you know, experienced in the UK, and understood, you know, that if we're going to cover Africa, it's going to be a real challenge developing high quality talent. But I think, you know, we're doing that to a degree, and that's good. It's good for capacity building, and it's good for our coverage. Who do we serve? Our readers are university leaders, senior academics, administrators, academics and researchers, students, policymakers, think tanks. Certainly of our subscribers, about 50% or above are professor level and above. So it's a high quality, high end audience, and that, you know, is reflected in the in-depth nature of the coverage. And if you look at where they are, you can see there's a big slice in the US and UK, but also other countries like South Africa and India, Philippines, interestingly, and we have quite a wide spread throughout the whole world. It's quite evenly spread, our audience, making us genuinely global. I mean, I talked about article length, but you know, we have our standard article length is 1,000, but we have quite a few that are much longer, in-depth reads. You know, some up to 5,000. We don't encourage that, but because it's a lot of work. But we do have them on key subjects where we feel it's worth it. What do we cover? We cover everything to do with higher education internationally. You know, from the reforms that countries are making, the challenges universities face, the tension created by geopolitics, its impact on higher education. Internationalization is a big subject, internationalization at home, but also recruitment of students, the recruitment of academic talent, international collaboration and research. You know, some of the big themes over the last few years have included the growing tension with China and the impact of that, you know, from the attempts to close the impact leading to the closure of Confucius Institutes in some countries, but also arguably the harassment of Chinese origin researchers in the US, and the effects of the Trump administration. We're seeing the ongoing effects really through the Republican-led states, with the constraints being imposed on academic freedom and what you can teach at universities and schools. Issues like decolonization is very big for our Africa edition. The transformative leadership, we spent a lot of time on how, and coverage on how universities can help society transform and all the issues related through that, developing effective global young citizens who will become leaders, tackling obstacles to change such as gender issues and social inequity, all the issues coming out of Black Lives Matter that affect higher education, diversity and inclusion, and of course the refugee crisis. But there are many, many more topics, and many of the bread and butter topics that you have to deal with every day also. So the key question is, how do we decide what to cover? And for that, we use both our journalistic nous, our knowledge of higher education, our dialogue with stakeholders in higher education, and we refer back to our values, because we're a value-driven organization. We're driven by journalism, not by sales. Our values include academic freedom, being internationalist, being pro-equity, diversity and inclusion, being ethical. It's very important to have integrity in what we do, and supporting excellence in research and teaching. So you could sort of sum it up that we support, in a way, through the way we cover it, you can see that we support a certain interpretation of higher education and research, which is that it's there to build knowledge, to enable individuals to fulfill their potential, and to take a leading role in transforming society, creating a better and fairer world. That's what we believe higher education and research should be about. So to give you an idea of, so we produce hundreds of articles, but obviously they're long ones. So if you're comparing with other people, and we have nearly 5 million page views per year. So we've grown quite a lot because we grew from nothing at the start. And we have subscribers who get our global and Africa newsletters once a week, telling you all the stories that are in that week. So there's 85,000 of those emails go out. I think that's 55,000 for the global edition, about 29 or 30 for the Africa edition. And we have 50,000 followers on social media, so we also push our content out that way. I can't really, you may not be able to see what the content is there, but this is the top of this week's edition, with the breaking stories at the moment, actually. So you're seeing breaking stories, and the top of Sunday's edition is the China story by Phil Ottbach and Hans de Witt, who regularly write for us. And you'll see from that, get an idea of the issues that we cover there. At the moment, we've got a story up about whether sanctions against Russian scientists should continue. We've got a story about a new study showing an overload of expansion of administrators rather than academics in Swedish universities. And then we have the story about another story on the tension with China and the impact that's going to have on China. And the story about Ukrainian students being stuck at the border, not being allowed across. And the story of Pakistan, with universities being urged to take a leading role in preventing the destruction of crops and animals, and the impact on humans, both through urgent current action, but also through their research agenda. And we have a place there about India reserving 25% extra places for international students. So that gives you an idea of the type of content that we have. One of the new things that we're doing, which we started in April, but it's a major strategic initiative which is in line with the commitment to supporting higher education's contribution to transforming society. We have set up our own SDGs hub, SDGs being the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the idea is to share best practice from universities to reflect the leading role that universities can play and are playing in many instances in tackling the global issues that the goals seek to address. And every week we put a whole bunch of news stories up there, commentaries about what we should be doing. We're working closely with IAU, the International Association of Universities, and we're going to be working much more closely with them in future. Andreas is there he'll be talking to you about that, about their contribution to sustainability tomorrow. We're working with HETL, Higher Education, Teaching and Learning, to promote the site as well. And we'd really like you to come on board with that and let us know what you're doing, what you feel universities should be doing, so that we improve our coverage. And a key point of that is that, the media's in a very difficult place at the moment for survival. We're in a very uncertain period. We had this grand switch to online news, a media which also developed the sort of idea that everything is free in the media, and then the media had to work out, well, how do we survive? Do we get people to pay a subscription, or do we do sponsorship deals? What do we do? So what do? We're very keen on maintaining our open access policy so that we can be read by everyone all around the world. So we rely to survive, apart from the fact that we put our own money in to get it going, but to survive, we rely on advertising and sponsored articles and partnerships. And the really great thing about partnerships is the thing we really favour, is we have partners with whom we work very closely, with whom we consult to get ideas about what richer content we can provide and that they would want to support providing. And we tap their knowledge basically, and they tap ours. And what do they get in return? They get reach. So they get to reach our entire audience in a way that they can be associated with thought leadership on these particular subjects, and they value that. But there's also the option for sponsored articles if they want to promote particular things that their university is doing, if they're individual institutions or organizations too. So there are different ways, but the partnerships is a really interesting thing where we have an ongoing relationship, which also means you're more likely to hear about the things that they're doing that we might want to cover in future, and really enables us to produce richer, more in-depth content in particular content areas. So we're very keen for people to come forward and let us know if they want to partner on particular subjects. But another thing that we're really interested in partnering for is to get feedback, because in journalism you put stories out and you never hear anything back. Now, whenever we go to a conference, we get really good feedback about University World News. We get a really strong idea that people trust us and value us, and they feel that we're their kind of publication rather than some of the other ones who are out there, and which is great. But we need to make ourselves more effective and think of ways that we can move forward. And we think the future is, it's all about connecting. That one thing we do is connect people. When we report on universities, it's connecting what you do with all those people out there in all those countries, and they're a high quality targeted readership from your point of view, because they're university leaders, senior academics, and everyone in academia and research, and students as well, but with a heavy emphasis on the professor level and above. So if you want to influence what other universities and what other people think, or enable them to know what you're doing so that they might want to collaborate, it's a platform that you can use. It's one of many, I'm sure. Excuse me. But lastly, the key thing of partnerships is to get feedback. So what we're really interested to know is, what do you see the value in having a publication that addresses higher education worldwide? Or what do you want to see in it? What don't we do that you would like us to do? Is it that you want us to set up specialist discussions for university leaders? Is it that you want us to cover particular topics that we're not covering? Is it that you actually want some shorter pieces as well? When you read University World News, do you ever think, well, I wish they did this or covered that? So I'd like this to start a sort of discussion here now, really, about what you want from the higher education media and University World News in particular.
Great, thanks very much, Brandon. So here's the opportunity for our audience to weigh in with questions and observations. When you have a seat. Any questions or comments or answers to Brendan's question?
I'll say for myself, the information you gave us about the UN SDG hub, Brendan, really exciting. I've applauded the work the IAU has done to bring universities together around the Sustainable Development Goals, but I think what has been missing, in a sense, has been a center for information, for the sharing of information and reporting on that. So I really applaud that initiative. And to answer the question you put at the end, I would say that it would be convening the sector around a number of other issues like that, not too many, but I mean, the SDGs do have a kind of global, well, obviously they have a global applicability and interest, and some similar issues like that might be a good thing. But I really like that, because I was going to ask you about the extent to which you see your role as convening the sector across national boundaries.
Very, very much so, because if you look at what we do, and a very important part of our publication is the commentary section, and the commentaries are all written by, well, nearly all written by academics, sometimes students, but often by senior academics, and they're a way to encourage debate about the direction in which higher education should go, including the contribution it should be making to transforming society. And so I think that's a valuable role that we play. We provide an arena for discussion for people from all the different countries around the world. And I think, but we can look at doing it in other ways, more enriching ways in future. So it may be that we also set up particular discussion groups to have live discussions where it was thought valuable. And as you say, we would look at what other subjects we would go into on depth. So there's two that we have, we did do transformative leadership, but it didn't have the support to keep going. That's been a sort of intermittent. But the SDGs is something that we're committed to doing absolutely every week, and see it as a major part of the publication without any end, ongoing. There's no time limit on it at all. So, because those challenges are not going to go away, and so we think that's really important. But yeah, I'd like to hear more ideas.
Thanks. Questions and observations? Please, go ahead.
Yes, my name is Oli Ottersen. I'm president of Karolinska Institute, Sweden. And I dare say I've been a keen reader of your journal for quite a number of years. So you touched upon this, but I would like to have your reflections on two different issues. One thing, of course, is the readership. How are your plans to develop your journal so that you will have an even more global readership than you have today? Because I think that's essential when you are discussing, for example, international cooperation in turbulent times. The second issue, and again, you alluded to this, all journals, they tend to preach to the choir, as it were. And I dare say that most of the readers here belong probably to the academic community. In the times to come, we will have plenty of discussions with authorities, departments, different governance structures that, of course, would like to perhaps strengthen the control of our sector, as it were. So how do you engage the authorities in this global communication about university autonomy, academic freedom, and as such? I dare say what we see in some countries, and I shouldn't mention names here, is that there is not exactly an understanding of what academic freedom and institutional autonomy is all about in the national and supranational governments. That was an understatement. Thank you.
Thank you for your two questions. Well, the first one on readership, how we expand readership. This is a challenge because if you're not resource rich, you have to find ways to do it, and the way that we're doing it is through our alliances with university associations, academic associations. So we do this thing called a cross-promotional partnerships. So we're doing one with Heatle, for instance, where because they value us and support us, they're promoting particular stories throughout their networks, sharing them. So, for instance, we had a story a couple of weeks ago, which Patrick Blessinger was one of the writers of, who heads Heatle, and it had 1,700 Facebook shares. Well, that's gold dust for promoting content. You know, normally an article might have, you know, if it's a really good article or controversial, it might have a few hundred Facebook shares. To have 1,700, we had one article promoted through them which had 40,000 Facebook shares. Fantastic, you know, over time. And time is an important thing, actually, because our stories get read a lot over time, not just in the week they come out. Our archive is read constantly because people are searching for the content. And that builds up readership as well. So one is, you know, you build up readership by producing the content that people want to reach. You build it up by constantly tweaking how you address SEO questions and the headache of how Google changes its algorithm to stop you finding these stories, which is, you know, we get hit by that from time to time. But best of all, through cross-promotional partnerships, so where we give something back. So we give exposure on our site in return for exposure on to other people's networks. And we come to an arrangement that way, and that's very good. That brings us closer to our potential audience, and it brings them closer to us. It tells them about us. So that's a great way of doing things. Now, in terms of preaching to the choir, how do we bring this issue of academic freedom, the widespread trend towards authoritarianism and the clampdown, the silencing of the academic voice? Well, this is an issue I've been dealing with for years inside and outside of UWN, because I wrote the Global Studies on Education Under Attack, and I used to go around presenting the findings in Paris, Geneva, Washington, New York, to international expert groups, and then INGOs took on the agenda, not just because of what I was doing, but there was lots of people doing things that helped put it on the agenda. But those studies were helpful in that process, and it impacted on UN Security Council resolutions on children in armed conflict, for instance. But how do we do it? So I think, you know, you do need to have a well-informed readership of University World News about these issues, and they need to go out. We do need to work in alliance with scholar rescue organizations and the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack to publicize these things. We did run a series last year or the year before, and we did get involved with the Berkeley Center for Higher Education series on, I'm going to try and remember the name of the book now, Higher Education and something like, it wasn't authoritarianism, it was a word like that. It was there's a whole book on this issue of rising authoritarianism and the impact on higher education. I wrote 2 chapters in it, one on Turkey, one on Brexit. Turkey is a prime example, and we'll hear from Tana tomorrow, but it's a prime example of a place where the academic voice is being silenced and academics are being persecuted. And we need to speak out, so it's very important that university leaders speak out on this issue. And one of the things we feel strongly on University World News is that academics, you know, the role of the academics speaking on important issues in the world, not just on their discipline, which is sometimes lost in the UK, but stronger in other countries. We think that's a good thing. We'd like to see more of it, and we'd like to see university leaders speaking out on these issues and telling governments why they're important, and international university associations pressing governments and raising the political cost of silencing academics by making it public around the world. I mean, that's what you can do. You know, it's not an easy fix, not a quick fix, but we have to be on it all the time.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. Taner Bilgiç from Boğaziçi University, Istanbul, Turkey. I have 2 questions. One of them is about the format. And I apologize if you already have it, because I just realized that I'm not a registered user of your site. Do you allow for discussion of your news items within the site? And this is related to the frequency. So it's weekly, therefore the frequency is really too fast to follow for probably many people. So when you get coverage, I realize that you do it outside. like in the social media. Why not do it within the site and somehow control it? I realize this is technically much more difficult than just putting out a story there, but then also follow up with the discussion. The second issue that I'd like to raise is the student involvement. Like, do you have any students in your board? Or how are the students involved in this journal? Thank you.
Thank you, Tanya. The two questions. That's interesting. You're saying is weekly too fast. Actually, we're moving away from the idea of saying it's weekly. We send a weekly newsletter because our reader surveys show that our readers like that. We don't know whether they like that because that's what they get, or whether if they had more, they wouldn't like that. But we realize that we have to move towards at least promoting some stories through emails every day in order to keep up in the. We have to keep up in the Google ranking. Not that we, like it's the hack that you have to do that, but to get seen, becomes a vicious circle if you don't. So we are looking at promoting some stories every day, and still letting people see a whole bunch once a week if that's what they like. But getting across the idea that because we do break stories every day, we're not simply a weekly. That's an old idea in a way. So you will see more of us if you want to. You won't have to have the emails if you don't want to. On the issue of commenting, well, this is a really tough one because in an ideal world, you would let people comment on your articles at the end of the article. But that creates two problems. One is it requires policing to avoid libel, and we don't have the resources to fight libel cases, because we haven't policed a debate online. So that's difficult. So you'd have to what's the word? Forgotten the word, but you'd have to look after that. And the second issue is that there is a security issue with it. It's a technical issue that we would have to solve. So I hear you, and we look at what we can do about that. But it might be that we could set up some specialist discussion groups in a different way, so that you could have high-quality discussions between people who want to be on that group, who are vetted, who are not going to be putting nonsense on, but are going to make high-quality contributions. And that might be more valuable to you, especially to university leaders are very busy. You don't want to plow away through a lot of nonsense to get key points. You want it curated, as it were. It's not quite the right word, but I think you know what I mean. So I think, yeah, possibly we should look at that. And the other issue of students, we do include student views, and we do report on student affairs and student protests and the student voice, which is very important. It's often a sign of what's to come, and they're often in the vanguard of change. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's counterproductive what they're doing, but but it's important that their views are heard. So I think in future we would like to do more on student issues and have more student contributions, but we haven't cracked that one yet. And also there's the issue of danger of diluting what we do, and so we need to gauge what our audience wants in that regard. But it's an important question that we're thinking about. Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Marcelo Knobo from the University of Campinas in Brazil. My question is about other media. You have essentially written content, and are you thinking about podcast or other form of communication?
Yeah, we think it's essential to move into other media, into podcasts and videos. We're looking at how we can build a capacity to do that. Again, it's a resource issue. A lot of it's chicken and egg. Once we can get more revenue in and become sustainable, we can start investing in this kind of thing, but it's certainly something we want to do. We want to have a series of podcasts interviewing university leaders on particular issues. For instance, we think that would be interesting. It would be useful to get some feedback on what kind of length of podcast is beneficial. Do you want short podcasts or long ones? Do you want multiple people in discussions or one person? What is it that you find most useful? We'll do some market research to try and understand that, but you can tell me while you're here if you have particular feelings about that. It'd be helpful to know what you, with other publications, what you enjoy experiencing.
Thanks, Marcelo. Over to you.
My name is Ferdinand. I'm Professor in International Relations and Security, President of Western Balkans University. I have a question regarding to your, how much political oriented is your editorial line, and I saw the percentage of access. So what is the countries of such as Russia, Iran, or China, the reading access? So what is the percentage if you have such? And have you evaluated any kind of influence of your articles or whatever in academic world in these regions, so in this kind of political, let me say, governing countries? Thank you.
Well, that's a good question. Well, the first part is access, so we're open access to anyone, anywhere in the world, as long as our site's not being blocked by somebody. So anyone can read us in theory, but it would be interesting to know if anyone is being prevented in any way. We're not aware of that. In terms of influence, I think we're quite influential, relatively influential for a higher education publication on the question of China, and because we focus a lot, Yojan is very strong on that. We focus a lot on China's attempts to control the higher education space in Hong Kong, for instance, and have given air to a lot of views of Hong Kong academics, and also reported on the pressures that universities are under to conform to that because of the national security law. You know, so that's a big, big issue that we've covered very extensively. You know, I think most people would agree more extensively than anyone else, and stronger because we have Chinese experts and people on the ground in Hong Kong who can do that. So I think that's, you know, that's a strength. Do we have influence in Russia? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that we do. We'd like to think that we do, but we do report from Russia using Russian academics and Russian correspondent, but I couldn't honestly say that we make an impact on the thinking in the Russian system, but you know, it'd be nice if we did. Yeah. I mean, the one thing to understand is obviously we are an English language online publication, so there's always going to be easier for people who speak English to access us, and harder in countries where English isn't a well-spoken, you know, a frequently spoken language for whatever reason. So harder to make an impact there. But I do think we make an impact on raising awareness about China, certainly.
Thank you. Andreas.
Yes, hello. Andreas Corcoran is my name. I work for the International Association of Universities, indeed. Brendan, you asked what, in terms of feedback, and you also, in your mission statement, said things about changing, and we heard also a predecessor spoke about the echo chamber, or preaching to the choir. So I think we can all come together and acknowledge that there is a discourse of university interests and developments that we all share, and that we receive through your medium, which is fantastic. So it's opinion building in a sense. But wouldn't it also be lovely to have those stakeholders, those decision makers, those governmental officials, those ministries, who then would perhaps also engage in the University World News, and possibly there have that as a medium in order to inform the university world? So I'm saying, at the moment it seems to me that it is by academics for academics, but to breach that echo chamber, so to speak, would it be possible to go beyond that?
Yes, I mean, it's not true that it's only by academics for academics. It's by journalists and academics. The journalism is important because the journalists go out and interview the ministers and do bring in the voice from other stakeholders through interviewing them. We also do run commentary pieces from ministers and think tanks and higher education officials. So we have had pieces from the head of the Higher Education Council in Turkey, for instance. We have had pieces and interviews from the then Minister of Higher Education in Ukraine. He used to be a frequent writer for us, in fact, Sergei Hit. So it's not that we don't have any, but you could argue that we should have more. Yeah, that would be interesting. But also, what I sense is we just collectively, what we need is different platforms at which, conferences at which, and they do happen in some higher education conferences, obviously, where they do bring in ministers and other stakeholders to hear the discussion and contribute. That is important. And we did do that when I was working on the education under attack issue. We did do that at expert conferences. We did bring in other stakeholders, but they tended to be from countries that were sympathetic to the idea of doing something about it. I also attended hostile UNESCO ambassador conferences where ambassadors lined up to attack me one after one for writing a report that dared to even mention that there was a conflict in their country, never mind the impact of it, because they didn't want it spoken about in an international arena. So it can be difficult, but I do think it's a very valid point that was made earlier, that if University World News we haven't so far, and we want to go into convening conferences, bring in stakeholders from outside to raise those issues with them, that would be a good way forward if we can do it. Again, it's a resource issue. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Salah Khalil, and I'm the founder of MCAT International, a company that specializes in the assessment and development of critical thinking skills. I have a couple of questions. The first one is on your approach to being international while your language is just English. And then a follow-up question, are there any plans for other languages? That's number one. Number two, in terms of your correspondence, do some of them write in their own language and it's translated, or they have to write in English and it's edited in English? Those are two sort of related questions. The other one, the final one, is on the revenue. It is incredibly hard for publications to create revenue, especially if they want to remain independent and completely autonomous. How is the advertising revenue? What scale, if you can share that with us, that would be very interesting. What scale is the advertising revenue annually, if that's not a private thing? Thank you.
Okay, the first two questions. Other languages, we would like to be able to run it in other languages, but that's a resource issue. We can't afford to at the moment. Translation costs. It's translation and legal costs. If you translate, you've got to know that it's translated accurately. We do run stories for which there is legal risk, and we certainly would be very wary of running stories of legal risk in another language if we don't understand the language ourselves. So that is quite a big challenge, and we would like to extend our coverage in Latin America, and for Latin America it would make sense to have Spanish, at least translated in Spanish, if not Portuguese. But it's not something we're capable of doing at the moment. It's just something that's a dream, but it's not something to do at the moment. What language do our correspondents write in? We often ask that question ourselves, because when we're editing the copy, because in some cases, the English isn't great, and then it takes a lot of work to get it into shape, and that is a problem. There is a bias of, there are all kinds of bias in journalism. There are bias towards what a story is, what that means. There are the bias towards the language of publication that you're working against. But we do make a point of using, say, for instance, African and Asian correspondents in countries where their English isn't great, and we have to work very hard to get that copy into a high enough standard. But that's a problem throughout Africa, as I learned from my days judging the Education Journalism Year Awards. It is a challenge if you're going to write in English. But that's just something we have to deal with. In terms of, are we going to share how much revenue we get? No, thank you. Let's put it this way: we're in a constant battle to achieve sustainability. At the moment, we're in danger of winning that battle, which is great. So we're in a really good place. We got an angel investor in last year who's helping us think through the business side much more effectively, so that we can do more for you and survive. And that is our aim. The journalism comes first. We're not a money-making machine, but we do need to flourish and invest in all these things that you're saying. It would be nice we do. We can only do that if we make the resources through raising revenue. So that's why we're always thinking of ways that we can improve that. At the moment, we're in a good place, and we hope to do better.
Thanks very much for the question. Are there any other questions or observations? If not, I want to thank Brendan very much for a great presentation, and also to say how gratifying it is to know that this work is being done in the name of good journalism that supports all the work that we do in our institutions, particularly in an age of alternative facts, this post-truth era. It's a great relief to know that there's this work being done to make sure that we all are aware, so far as possible, in an accurate way of what the issues are in the sector around the world. I'm reminded of the fact that some of the other major communications organs in the field do a good job of communicating the news, but often around special issues of interest to them too. So there may be a commercial interest for some of the sources from which we get our information. And what's really gratifying here is that it's service to the sector that is really driving this initiative. So Brendan, thank you very much. And we recognize the economic imperatives. You've got to survive, it's got to be sustainable, and we want you to succeed, but also appreciate the philosophy behind this. So please, everyone, join me in thanking Brendan. Thank you. We have two speakers for our next session, so we'll just do a changing of the guard up here. I should mention, I ought to have said at the beginning that this pre-conference program is brought to you in association with University of World News and the University of Bologna. So we have UWN to thank for this as well. Thanks, Brendan. That was great. Thank you. Good job. We'll have a chance to talk later on.
Sure.
You coming to the dinner tonight?
Yes.
Yeah, we have a seat prepared for you here. You're over here. You seem a bit far away from it. Bring this over. This doesn't get in the way for you. Right, we are now going to turn our attention to a more specific topic than the affairs that animate the sector globally. We're picking up the central theme of the conference, which is universities engaging with society in turbulent times, and that relationship between universities and the communities of which they are part, the citizens who make up our institutions, and the social networks that surround them. We have two speakers here. Massimiliano Tarozzi, who is the UNESCO Chair in Global Citizenship Education in Higher Education. He's a full professor at the University of Bologna, where he is the founding director of the International Research Center on Global Citizenship Education. He was co-director of the Development Education Research Center at the UCL Institute of Education, where he is a visiting professor. He is a member of the advisory board and coordinator of the Academic Network on Global Education and Learning. We were also to have with us today the mayor of Bologna, Matteo Lepore. He has sent regrets, but we're very pleased that Rita Monticelli, who will be speaking in the next session as well, has offered to speak on his behalf and to raise some of the issues that the mayor would have wanted to raise with all of you. So I'll formally introduce Rita in her own session when we move on to that. But I'll turn to Massimiliano to say a few words, and we'll follow the same format we did in the last session. Our two speakers will make their presentations, and then we'll invite your comments and dialogue with them. So over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for this invitation. Thank you to the Observatory of Magna Charta Universitatum for this invitation, and I'm very proud of this invitation, because I remember back in 1988 here in Bologna. I was a student here at the University of Bologna, and I remember perfectly in September in the Piazza Maggiore a number of rector, provost, and presidents for university coming from all over the world, sitting in the square and signing this so important historical document that was so impressive for me as a student. And I've never imagined 34 years later to be here discussing this document, still this document. So I'm particularly proud of being here today, as to me it's full of symbolic meaning, the fact I'm here today. Well, I was asked to speak about global citizenship education in 2022, sorry, as a way for engaging university in turbulent times. And I will address this topic by, first of all, try to introduce the concept, the notion of global citizenship education in higher education, according especially to the UNESCO perspective, and then I will try to focus the role of university and higher education institutions in promoting global citizenship education in the framework of the Magna Charta Universitatum. In 2015, UNESCO defined global citizenship education as follows. Global citizenship referred to a sense of belonging to a broader community and common humanity. It emphasizes political, economic, social, and cultural interdependency and interconnectedness between the local, the national, and the global. So interdependency and interconnectedness, connecting the social and the environmental sphere, are key concepts of this educational approach that echo some of the core values expressed in the Magna Charta Universitatum. In particular, I like to stress the three concentric circles, local, national, and global, at the core of this pedagogical concept, and also of the Magna Charta, which read and follow the Magna Charta. While universities are immersed in and connected with global developments, they engage fully with and assume leading role in local communities and ecosystems. Similarly, global citizenship education assumes that globalization without citizenship, and so without deep roots in a precise territory, is a naive theoretical abstraction, while national citizenship without a global stance is politically and pedagogically blind. More, our experience as UNESCO chair in global citizenship education in higher education, recently appointed at the University of Bologna, demonstrated how crucial is a deep relationship with local authority, and especially with the Municipality of Bologna. We organized together an important event here in Bologna before the summer in June on the concept of global citizenship education and the role of the collaboration between local authorities, territory, and university. Education as a common good is like a tree that has deep roots, firmly planted in a local community, and all tall branches stretching toward the globe. The deeper the roots, the taller the branches grow. In this presentation, I'll address two questions, both related to the principles and values of the 2020 Magna Charta Universitatum, as anticipated. So what is global citizenship education, and what is the role of university? In these present days, the modern notion of national social citizenship, national citizenship, seems to be in crisis, particularly in post-national, unequal, and diverse societies. In post-national and super-diverse societies, citizenship should be regarded as a global and multi-faced identity rooted in a complex structure of relationships between individuals and groups, and not only within the nation state. Here, education can play a pivotal role in forming citizens that are able to understand the political public culture, to participate in its institution, to be autonomous, to develop political virtues, in sum, to exert and not only to understand their rights and obligations. This is the learning environment for global citizenship education. But what is precisely global citizenship education? Semantically, this is a very vague concept. It appears to have a clear definitional power only one look at it from afar. The more one approaches, the more it vanishes and its definitory power decreases. Nevertheless, a core belief lies underneath the different understanding of this educational idea, obviously a very general one, according to which, in today's interconnected world, it is necessary to learn knowledge, skills, behavior, values, beliefs that will enable the new generation to live in this new planetary context. The growing political attention given to global citizenship education in education policy and practice by the international community is related to the Global Education First initiative launched by the United Nations Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in September 2012. In launching this initiative, the former United Nations Secretary General set 3 priorities. First, guarantee basic education to every child. Second, improving the quality of learning. And third, promoting global citizenship. Priorities 1 and 2 were already set in the Millennium Development Goals, but they were never achieved. The real novelty in this initiative lied in the introduction of education for global citizenship, which emerged for the first time in such an authoritative and influential forum. As a result of this initiative, several supranational organizations, both governmental and non-governmental, took action to conceptualize, promote, and disseminate this approach. Overall, UNESCO, understandably, has played a crucial role in this operation. If the United Nations Global Education First initiative initiated a kind of a new epoch for global education, seen as a building block of every society, a global dimension in education can be traced back much earlier. Long before the very term of global citizenship education was coined, in 1974, UNESCO recommendation concerning education for an international understanding, UNESCO called on member states that their education political agendas are guided by a global perspective and a commitment toward international solidarity. Upon closer inspection, then, a clear formulation of global citizenship education can be found in Article 26 of the 1948 Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which in essence contained a declaration of an education for global citizenship included in the notion of education as a universal human right. The global dimension is even more explicit and elaborated in 1989 Convention of the Right of the Child, where the aims of education in the Article 29 explicitly mention values and behaviors related to global citizenship and sustainability. In the Western world, as in many other regions of the planet, there have been other concepts that recall this idea even before 2012. For instance, moving up the course of the history in the Western tradition, the European tradition, the idea of global citizenship in form of cosmopolitanism has its roots far back in the ancient and middle Stoicism. It was later reworked in the modernity by the Enlightenment, and especially in Kant's For a Perpetual Peace. But it's also noted, should be also noted, that many non-Western civilizations have developed even more sophisticated idea of positioning the individual in relationship with other and more generally to the planet. So, for example, the concept of Latin America, Buen Vivir, or the South Africa Ubuntu concept. In recent times, the most important milestone for global citizenship education international recognition was its introduction in 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals. Here, in the SDGs, global citizenship education is explicitly mentioned as one of the targets, but also as a cross-cutting strategy to achieve all the goals and raise awareness about these issues. The target 4.7 referred to global citizenship education in combination with his twin concept, education for sustainable development, defined as complementary approaches. SDGs have had an extraordinary impact on the agenda setting of national governments' politics to integrate these two programs in education practice and national school curriculum, but also in higher education institutions, as was mentioned at the beginning of this session. University of Bologna, as well as many other universities across the globe, has adopted Sustainable Development Goals and the Agenda 2030 as its development strategy and its values as an overall framework for future development. Despite the growing political prominence of global citizenship education broadly promoted by supranational political institutions, there are different and sometimes contrasting reasons for this global shift in education. It is open to many different conceptual, political, and educational typologies addressing dissimilar objectives rooted in contrastive discursive orientations and political positioning. For example, first of all, global citizenship education is understood as an approach that shapes a widespread sense of internationalism, often naive internationalism, to a cosmopolitanism founded in human rights and universal values. But its superficial globalist perspective has been sometimes criticized as an expression of masked neo-colonialism. Alternatively, a critical view of global citizenship education that emphasizes equality and social justice as fundamental educational goals has been developed by many scholars. From others, from another perspective, a growing interest in global citizenship is spread by international organizations such as the OECD, for example, and other large global foundations that support this education approach as a part of a neoliberal discourse economy, knowledge economy discourse to provide a global competence to the new generation, but sometimes just for global elites. Among different discourses underpinning global citizenship education, I personally embrace a global social justice framework which considers global citizenship education a new perspective that allows policymakers and practitioners to reconceptualize old issues within a new educational stance. So intended, global citizenship education can be considered as an ethos that should be grounded on individual choices and responsibility toward both the social community and the natural environment in form of knowledge, beliefs, behavior, but also political engagement. Additionally, a global social justice combines the subjective dimension of an individual global mindedness with responsible behavior in the social and environmental spheres. Against this framework, which inspired activity of the UNESCO Chair in Global Citizenship Education here at the University of Bologna, key educational issues such as interculturality, sustainability, and social justice make new sense in a new holistic way. And this holistic approach, all-encompassing approach, following the global education perspective, has been widely championed by UNESCO, who since 2014 has advocated the holistic nature of global citizenship education as a framing paradigm. More recently, UNESCO, to emphasize the complementarity and synergy among diverse education programs and approaches that have been implemented worldwide to disseminate global citizenship education and education for sustainable development, is moving toward an integrated approach to target 4.7, the SDGs, as a whole, to bring together holistically under the term transformative education all the fields and approaches mentioned in the target. So now why, so this is a brief introduction on global citizenship education. Why university? What is the role of university in promoting and disseminating global citizenship education? In 2017, University of Bologna, in this same room, hosted the first international conference entitled Global Citizenship Education, the Role of Education in Globalized World, focusing on the contribution of higher education to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development through the promotion of global citizenship. This was a pioneer event in our country, and a final document drawn from the conference and the work of the cross-disciplinary team within this university was developed and submitted to the G7 meeting hosted in Italy in the same period. At that time, the rector, recalling the role of the University of Bologna in promoting the Magna Charta Universitatem, in that occasion affirmed, unquote, "The time has come to return to the value of education as a foundational experience and to recognize global citizenship as a platform from which to develop the university of the future, a third pillar to add to research and teaching," end quote. The role of university in shaping the future of an interconnected world has been recently stressed by UNESCO in its prominent report published last year, entitled Reimaging Our Futures, plural, Reimaging Our Futures Together, a New Social Contract for Education. An authoritative and diverse international commission chaired by Salwork Zode, President of the Democratic Republic of Ethiopia. It's particularly important to stress that the chair of this international committee is a woman, is an African woman, produced after 2 years of work of an ambitious report aimed at reimagining how knowledge and education can shape the future of humanity and the planet. This is the third time in the UNESCO history that a commission has been set up to rethink education at the global level, and the presidents have produced the renowned Ford report and Delors report, respectively, in 1972 and in 1996. By the way, the UNESCO report will form the basis of the United Nations Transforming Education Summit, which will take place in New York in the next few days. This report, this so important report, claims that to create peaceful, just, and sustainable future, education itself should be transformed by changing the system of relations between men and women, but also between them, the planet, and the technology. In order to do this, the report indicates a number of priorities and imperatives on which education can make a transformative contribution. These imperative can be placed on 3 levels, which call for a radical rethinking of the premises and aims of educational action. First of all, to heal the wounds of deep inequalities within and between nations, to repair injustice generated by gender inequalities and more broadly by contrast power asymmetries. Secondly, redefine the relationship with the environment, overcoming the anthropocentric humanism that has justified an irresponsible relationship with the biosphere. And third, rethink the use and the role of technology. These expected changes require a new social contract to shape more just, peaceful, and sustainable futures, and this idea is the leitmotif running through the entire report. In the second part of the report includes concrete proposals and guidelines for renewing education by rethinking its pedagogical premises, school curriculum, teacher training, and among the educational agency, a key role is acknowledged at the universities. The need to reconceptualize the ways in which human beings related to each other, the human sphere, to the planet, the non-human natural sphere, and to the technology, the non-human artificial sphere, emerge vividly from the report. This need is also reflected in some educational practices outside and inside school. In particular, global citizenship education responds to this need. Being an educational approach framing the very idea of interdependence and integration between the social sphere and the natural sphere. Unlike 20th century, in which education was aimed at developing skills to support national citizenship, as also reflected in the early Ford and Delors report from UNESCO, the future in this report are shared, closely interconnected and global to combine various spheres and human and non-human. In this report, the Commission claims for renewing the mission of higher education. Participation in higher education has tremendously increased over the past 50 years, from the 10% of the population in young adult back in the 70s to the 40% in high-income countries. More important is feminization of university participation, but much still needs to be done, especially in low and middle-income countries. Despite this remarkable progress in expanding educational opportunity over the past decades, access to high-quality education remain incomplete and to some extent inequitable. Higher education systems are also places that exclude and marginalize. They might be also places that can exclude and marginalize. Many enclosures are produced, especially in recent decades, through the cost barriers and intellectual property claims. The report argues that it is crucial to create public spaces for learning and advocate for free and open access to knowledge and science. In renewing the mission, the report maintains that the educational role of university has been neglected in recent decades as a result of the way that higher education is organized, accredited, and financed, and pedagogy has moved to the background in many universities. Against the dominant role of accountability and measurement, ranking and assessment, the report invites us finally to recognize the need to think about long-term aims of education. To move pedagogy back to the foreground, it is said that it's necessary to give greater value to the teaching work of professors and support their pedagogical learning and growth. In particular, university must foster ethics and support students to be better and more capable citizens with greater awareness of their civic and environmental responsibilities. That's why global citizenship education is particularly suitable as a transversal teaching for all the students who deserve to learn global competence during their studies, regardless to the courses they attend. A global citizenship education ethos for higher education institutions is clearly advocated in this report by mentioning values and principles mirroring some values expressed in the Magna Charta. I'm quoting, appreciation of cultural diversity, a commitment to defend human rights and intolerance for racism, sexism, classism, ethnocentrism, and discrimination in all forms must be key educational objective. Higher education that advances such values and principles goes beyond the confines of lecture halls and virtual spaces. It is ever evolving in its content and it empowers individuals to become better versions of themselves, to make strong value system forward and to transform their environments, end quote. Cultural diversity has a key role in global university, not only as a research object, but also as a research form. Intercultural and epistemic diversity should be evaluated. Plurality in ways of knowing and diverse approaches to knowledge ecosystem drawing from many different cultures should be more facilitated even through truly mutual partnership between higher education institutions. The Magna Charta Universitatum 2020 goes precisely in that direction, especially in its revised form, which is definitely less Eurocentric than the first one. It acknowledges that interconnectedness and interdependencies frame higher education institutions, scholars, and learners worldwide. Recognize that values such as tolerance and respect, equity, and fairness must be at the core of at the core of the mission of universities. Moreover, education, even higher tertiary education, is a human right as such, a public good, and should be available to all. In sum, to reimagine the role of university as a global education agency in turbulent times, a new social contract is needed, and also called from the Magna Charta Universitatum, in which universities, where teaching and research are inseparable, must play a fundamental role to ensure inclusive social justice, especially to protect the most vulnerable. This social contract does not only involve communities and civil society, but also the planet as a whole, since social justice is always inseparable from ecological justice. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Massimiliano. We'll move to our second speaker, and then we can take questions for you together at the end of the session. So I'd like to, I said I would hold off on the full introduction for Rita Monticelli, and I will her academic introduction, but it is relevant, since she's speaking partly on behalf of the mayor here today, to let you know that she is a city councillor for the city of Bologna, with responsibility for human rights, interreligious and intercultural dialogue in the city of Bologna. Rita,
Thank you so much, Professor Dean. Thank you, everybody, for being us. Thanks for the invitation to this important anniversary of the Magna Charta. Can you hear me? Yes. And it is an honor for me to represent the mayor of the city of Bologna, who cannot be present and is very sorry about that. I'm here because I am his delegate for human rights, interreligious and intercultural dialogue. And before starting, really, we want to wish you a fruitful conference. We hope you enjoy your stay in our town, and we are honored to host you here. I've written down some notes together with him, so I'm going by fragments, not to miss things we want to say about the relationship between the town and the university in this anniversary. The title of this event is a reminder of the challenges we must undertake together between city and university for our young people, for our entire community. The presence of so many universities makes the Magna Charta a transnational and global document, in the most positive meaning of the term, to build together policies of equality, rights, global citizenship, and the formation of young citizens of the world. The presence of the municipality here would like to represent the unity of purpose between the university and the metropolitan city. It is urgent that we not only witness the crisis, but we seize the opportunity for deep and radical change. Our progressive city program, we call Bologna la città del progresso, del progressista, testify to this awareness and need. Bologna is a progressive, democratic, and welcoming city. The question of welcoming is very important in our tradition. It's a special city concerning solidarity. It has solidarity roots and great hopes for the future. The history of our city is studied with choices and events that have always pushed forward the frontier of rights and opportunities. Ever since 1256, when it was the first municipality to free slaves through a contract called Liber Paradisus. Then Bologna has a very important history of memory, of loss, but also of resistance. This is the history of partisans in our region. From that to present, Bologna has always fought to remain open and cosmopolitan, an industrious and innovative city. By the foundation of the first university in the Western world, Bologna has been founded just a few years later. They are born together, sisters of the path of the culture, of law and hospitality. We cultivate the common direction with many co-projects. You can all read all of them in our website at university and the website of the Comune di Bologna. The most progressive city, at least we should be the most progressive city in Italy, will face various challenges in the coming years, leaving no one behind. This is our refrain. We cannot leave anybody behind. So science, we bet on knowledge. This is another part which is very important in our program. We bet on knowledge, the true hallmark of our history, which can become also the key to our future. Science and knowledge, university and city, cultures, will have to give a new direction to the set of our policies for promoting the city, attracting talent and quality investment, development, innovation, urban and environmental regeneration, but they will also be the way to foster new processes, and without them will be a failure, processes of social inclusion, and to strengthen the city's democratic fabric. The culture we want is culture from an inclusive knowledge, from knowledge coming from different citizens which are not already citizens, that this is a problem, from different culture, from this intercultural town. We want Bologna to be an intercultural area. So we need this politics of we together for progress, but an inclusive one. We have to fight against inequality, discrimination, and marginalization. We believe with university in the right to fragility, a vulnerability. And we have the duty as institution to recognize and take care of them. The university has implemented important programs, as we will see in the future interventions, for refugees and aid for the most fragile students with disabilities, a very important gender equality plan, we can call it gender and diversity equality plan, which is in synergy with the one we have adopted in our town. On July 13, with the approval of the Metropolitan Council, the Metropolitan City, when we say Metropolitan City, we mean the town of Bologna and all the areas surrounding it, has approved a gender equality plan with 5 important points which we deal with also with the university. Paid work, unpaid work, countering gender-based violence, culture of equality, counter multiple intersectional discriminations. We cannot talk about women, we cannot talk about LGBTQ people without acknowledging that there are also diverse positioning in our society. So we need to talk about equity, so giving different instruments in order to achieve this equality. Bologna is also a landmark and the city at the forefront of struggle against all forms of discrimination, and it is one of the first towns in Italy who has fought and has recognized civil rights for LGBTQ plus communities. Its feminist tradition, Bologna as a tradition of feminisms, of which we are proud, is foundational in the gender equality plan, but also in the construction of our town, in the city council, in the production of knowledge and co-projects within the university. We are very proud of Bologna being a feminist town. It is also important for us here, we have the chair for global education. We also have a chair in Bologna for interreligious dialogue and peace. And we have also in our town a space for interreligious, intercultural dialogue. We don't talk enough about the role of religions in our society, in good or bad ways, but it is very important for us to construct. We have already the place, we will disveil it in a few months. We have an agreement between the university and different religions, the Jewish community, the Islamic communities, and the Catholic Church and other Christian church here, and we are opening to all other confessions to build a house which is a practical one, but also a symbolic one for a dialogue which does not misrepresent underrepresented voices in our culture and in our community. And it is also a place where you would like to enhance religious freedom, social dialogue, and peace. The most important word for us is to listen to the other positions and to talk together, but first to listen. Bologna will champion a pact against the poverty and social exclusion that involves different actors in a joint, collaborative and synergic action at multiple levels. And this is very important. It's not only the university, not only the municipality, but all the realities present in town. A lot of associations. So we don't want to build up a sort of top-down alliances, but together from the very beginning. This is very important. Also, we respond together with the university to the European Union invitation. We have Horizon Europe going ahead to respond to see citizen not as an impact, but really starting from the very beginning to co-project with people together with the university and the city council. We are very proud to say that we were able on Monday, June 27, to approve a resolution to amend the Municipal Charter with reference to the principles of ius soli introduced inside it, affirming the importance for the concrete implementation of the constitutional principle of equality and the recognition of honorary citizenship for foreign minors. For people who are here in Italy, they don't have citizenship yet. This is a symbolic act, of course, the ius soli, but we wanted to be more concrete, to push it forward, the Italian government to do that, this Ius Scholae, which is too much and too much time postponed. And we also have another important project with the University of Bologna, together with the Corridors for Refugees. I see here the Pro-Rector for International Relations, Raffaella Campaner, with whom we work a lot, and for Equal Opportunity, Cristina De Maria. I want to thank them for working together towards also the constitution of Corridors for Refugees. We have for Afghanistan, of course, for Ukraine, and now we are building up a space together with, for shelter cities. Bologna wants to become a shelter city for people who defend human rights. And so we are really working together in the field of human rights and civil rights. There are so many other things we are doing with the university. I just want to mention the important, largest national archive on the democratic history of our country. We have already the position, we have started, we have association, because memory for us is extremely important. We want also to host not only memory of our region, of our town, but also sometimes controversial memories coming from different cultures, but we really have to acknowledge them without excluding anybody and any history, because all together we construct a continuous renewal of history and memory. And so the alliance with Alma Mater is also important, and then I conclude for many reasons, but also for one very important path. Of course, the most important one is the presence of students here. So students, we want to consider them citizens of Bologna. Not only people who come here, we host them and goodbye. We really would like them to stay here, to feel that we have hospitality in terms of concrete actions. The problem of housing in Bologna is very difficult, so we have plans together for rental, and so we are trying to do our best. Bologna is doing a lot at the University of Bologna for the students, and we are trying to join them with new, organization for housing, flats for them, and spaces where to stay. Last but not least, we are really trying to rethink some places of our town together with the university, to give it a reusage, to see whether places were dismissed, and some people consider them as places for crime and so on, can be in a way rethought in this idea of global citizenship, global idea of a different Europe, a different world where people are welcomed and they work together. So thank you so much for being with us here in Bologna. Thank you and welcome.
Well, thanks very much, Rita. Two really intriguing and provocative presentations. I should say I'm certain almost everyone in the room, whatever institutions are represented here, aspire to that kind of vision of a university nurturing a sense of citizenship as powerfully as Rita has described it. I think very few institutions, however, are fortunate enough to have a history going back as long as this history here in Bologna of cooperation, this thing that is summarized, I think, in the Comune di Bologna, the idea of a commitment on the part of the city and the university to rights and the enfranchisement of the population in that way. So fabulous, thank you. Great to hear about those marks of progress here in the city and at University of Bologna. I'd like to go to the group for questions. I want to begin, though, by asking Massimiliano a question. I love the distinction you made between education for national citizenship as a former preoccupation of universities, now to be replaced with this notion of education for global citizenship. And that did alert me to what I think is one of the big problems in my own institution, and certainly in others in North America that I know of. There's a sense within the university of movement in the direction you were describing towards that ideal of educating students to be citizens of the globe. Institutions as a whole are a bit preoccupied with the old citizenship on a national basis. And here I'm thinking about, Andres has heard me talk about this before, the preoccupation with competition within nations, between universities, and then between nations. I think the issues that are at stake with higher education are too great for us to continue down that road. But there is something very different in that idea of education for global citizenship versus the national thing, which is premised on a degree of privilege, separation, and competition, and a much more cooperative global vision. I wondered if you could say a little bit about that. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you for stressing this, which is one of the key points of my presentation. So the so-called divide between national and global citizenship. This divide, defining national global citizenship, national citizenship, so the so-called restricted conception of citizenship, according to David Held, as a national citizenship, is more related to the three different UNESCO reports. So I mentioned this shift in the two previous reports, the 4 and the lower report in the UNESCO, where they were mostly focused on promoting an idea of national political citizenship. And that was most of the core of those report. Why in the last one, or last year, the emphasis on global citizenship is much higher. So I wanted to stress, to highlight this shift in these three different important reports issued by UNESCO, very influential report issued by UNESCO. However, I do not personally believe that there is a real contrast between national and global citizenship. As I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, I think that there is a sort of a concentric circle, both in personal identity and in political identity, in terms of political representation, political belonging to different idea of citizenship. I think that is perfectly understandable that every individual can at the same time be a national citizen, a local citizen, and a global citizen without any contrast between these different identity, a different identity, a different idea of citizenship. So there is a strong continuity in that, in the local and in the national citizenship. In fact, I mentioned at the beginning that a national idea of citizenship should be expanded with a global perspective, should be expanded, because without a global stance in a national perspective, the risk is to have a too narrow and blind vision of citizenship, in terms of education, of course. But on the other hand, a global citizenship without any local and national rooting is completely abstract and naive. So that therefore there's absolutely an important dialectic between these two dimensions. So there's no, to me, a contrast between the two dimensions of citizenship in terms of education.
Thanks. Excellent, very helpful answer. So questions from the audience, please.
First of all, to Rita Monticelli, I think we are all impressed by what Bologna does when it comes to human rights and equity and to how the students are welcomed here. So congratulations. And of course, it goes all the way back to 2088, and the fact that civil law, I guess, was one of the first topics taught here in Bologna. So we are impressed. But I have a question to you, Professor Tarozzi, and it goes directly into the dialogue you just had. Because I beg to disagree. There is a tremendous tension between what happens at the national level, but also at the regional level. And it has to do with how we define values. I guess you have all read some of the most recent papers, documents from the European Union, for example, and it's not only the European Union, where they stress the importance of European values. And many countries, they refer to their own values as national values, specific for their countries. If there's one thing that is a prerequisite in my mind for a global citizenship education, is that we all refer to the same values. How can we otherwise be one community? So I think we should send a very clear signal to our authorities that in order to uphold the concept of global education citizenship, we must uphold the idea of having universal values rather than struggling for the moral high ground by referring to our own values. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Birgitta Bergvall Kåreborn, Principal of Luleå University of Technology. Thank you so much for the presentations, really, really interesting. And I think I have some related issues as we just heard. I think that it's lovely that we have come to a point where we actually, to some extent, have a lot of joint values, striving for joint visions and strategies, and for a common culture. But my question is, what do we do when we see that we are moving against and away from these rather than towards them in a global perspective? We talked about gender equality for many years. Still, if we look at all our universities, I think that we see that the amount of men rather than women in our management is higher. Top researchers are higher among men. If we don't think that they are smarter, it is a structural problem that we have. If we look at people from other countries in our university, I think we see the same. When we look at global values and we look at Afghanistan, for example, that now do not allow women to study more or less at all to some extent. What do we do when the world is going against our view, our visions, our strategies, and our values? And how can we be as helpful to each other and share good examples to change that as we have been creating these visions?
Who would like to go first? Would you like to, Karen? Go ahead.
Okay. So thank you for the very challenging question. In my following paper, we'll try to, not to answer, it's impossible, but to draw some other questions which are exactly what you are saying. So I think that, again, this brings together a lot of things which are interconnected. So when we talk about global citizenship, when we talk about human rights, are we really talking about theories of human rights and theories of global citizenship, or are we trying to do something about it? For instance, concerning women and violence against women, you know that the European Union for the Gender Equality Plan has advised us, not advised us, imposed us, and I'm very glad that they did, money and people allocated against violence against women or gender violence. So as you were saying, what can we do for people who are living in different situations? What can I do for refugees? What can I do for people who are escaping from different conditions? So I think the task of the university is to take into consideration also this idea of bringing together local culture and sovereign elements of rights. So to me, the question of human rights involves what you are saying, but it implies negotiations with countries, negotiation with people, and maybe rethinking the way in which we deal with them. And I've seen during this period, together with the people I've mentioned before, we have opened corridors for women from Afghanistan and from Ukraine, and of course there were more women. And it is also important to not to impose our views, but also to deal and listen and trying to find a path in between and towards this transversal impossibility to overcome the basic human rights we have to carry out and to impose on the world. And I am not sure the word is imposed, but really if then in United Nations, the Charter of Human Rights say, for instance, freedom of expression, freedom also for the press, we were saying before. And so I think the task of the university is really to protect, to start with the researchers and people who are at risk within these kind of countries which are not, that does not comply with human rights. And also another thing we could do is, I don't know whether it is possible, but it's the same thing we have in Bologna with the Ius Soli. It is a symbolic one. Global citizenship, we are talking about global citizenship in a symbolic way. So can we do something political to transform global citizenship in something more active? So that our students, people who cross borders, are protected in what they are doing. I mean, I think we should be concrete and say, okay, we are discussing about university, the role of the university. How can we transform global citizenship, Ius Soli, in this case in Italy, Ius Scholae, for instance, and the task of the university, academic freedom, in political, in the higher way. I'm not talking about parties, I'm talking about in political solidarity. How can we transform the aids for refugees in a more educational way to rethink the world? I am very provocative. Long ago in Toronto, I was telling you about, we were discussing interculturalism, where we say, are the human rights written by everybody, by all countries? Can we sit together and also, starting from human rights, discuss how we can deal with them in an intercultural way, universal and intercultural together? And so it was a very provocative idea, but I think the idea of interculturality, again, implies a very, very difficult task of bringing together local cultures and global cultures. Sometimes when we discuss human rights, sometimes they ask us, they tell us, the university, for instance, you are dealing in a very Eurocentric way. How can you transgress this view and without giving up human rights? You are talking about countries which deny human rights, violation of human rights. How can you bring together traditions and innovation, tradition and human rights in a sovereign way? This is the challenge of the university, I think. Trying to rethink and study and learning, and a very patient but important, incessant way to rethink knowledge cultures. I will discuss a bit later the role of Edward Said in the 90s in this path. I have no better answer, otherwise I think I wouldn't be here, but I'm here to learn from your experiences. My position is an open up, trying to continue negotiation between my role as delegate for human rights and the teacher at the University of Women's Studies. You know that, for instance, now gender studies and women's studies are at risk, not only all over the world, but also in Europe. And so my way of resisting is accepting students coming from abroad, although sometimes it's difficult, and carry on with the idea that we also need a different kind of culture, that universalisms most of the time is, what can I say, a way to impose culture. And so we have to deal between universal things and our negotiation with many different realities and cultures. I don't know, I know I haven't answered, but we can carry on with the question together. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. Massimiliano?
Well, just a few words, because that, of course, I cannot answer properly to this question, because you did right in raising this issue, because it's an open issue. I'm perfectly aware that the fact that there is recently a kind of backlash of global values, emphasizing on the other side national values or even nationalism in Europe and elsewhere. I'm perfectly aware of that, and this has consequences also in education policy and practice. For example, in the UK a few years ago, the new compulsory topic has been introduced, fundamental British values. And the same is in Italy 2 years ago, has been introduced civic education with a strong emphasis of national identity and legacy, etc. As something happens similar in many European countries. So there are consequences in education policy and practice of this re-emergence of nationalism, and I must agree that there is an opposition between this national idea in terms of values and beliefs compared to the global one, to the global dimension. Of course, I do believe, and I think that we are here, we do believe in global values. We do believe in human rights. We do believe in human values at the basis of the university missions. I'm sure about that. And global citizenship education, precisely an educational approach going in that direction. However, I think that is not the right way to emphasize the opposition between national and global, but on the contrary, try to go to the global starting from the local culture, the local tradition, the local values, and starting from there, going beyond the limited, narrow-minded view, in embracing a more holistic view that could go further, far beyond the national and narrow-minded view to embrace a more global idea. For example, I met many brilliant teachers in the UK that started from the international, from the fundamental British value. They create extraordinary educational activities in teaching human rights, starting from the local activity, for example, for the British attitude to queuing. So starting from this idea, expanding the idea toward human rights and rule of law. Or, for example, I met last week a group of teachers from Norway. They starting with a teacher training process in which they were teaching the issue of sustainability by talking with fishermen in a small isolated island in the Norway, and going with them and speaking with them about fishing issues and challenges, and from that concrete experience, they're expanding to the broader idea of sustainability. That was what I mean. I'm perfectly aware that there is an opposition, but instead of following this opposition, I do prefer, especially in education, with my educational approach, I do prefer to try to overcome this division, this contraposition, this divide, in order to have a more holistic and inclusive perspective, starting from national, local perspective and going beyond from that. So that is more or less the pedagogical idea I strongly support.
Thanks very much. Do we have a question up there? Do you think we have? Okay, please go ahead. Probably have time for one or two brief ones.
Hi, I'll make my question quick. My name is Martina, and I'm going to be chairing the second World Cafe table tomorrow on student engagement. So, of course, it has an implication towards global citizenship education because it can be realized through student engagement. And actually, my first question to the UNESCO chair was actually answered on a good practice example. So I will ask you a different question and push you a bit more on how we can overcome the opposition towards global citizenship education. What do we need to improve? Is it our research on it? Is it our communication on it? Is it our implementation? And a question towards the office of the mayor of Bologna. A similar good practice example that has seen many students engage with, many students of diverse backgrounds engage with. Can you name perhaps one or two? And how would you see a global citizen approach come into that activity or event? Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to go first?
I've already mentioned a couple of examples of the idea of how could the global values be infused through a local activity. Another example related to the university, for example, is here at the University of Bologna, we are starting a brand new program in teaching global competence to the students, to every students, regardless the course of study. So to every student, it's open to every student. And this course is not related to a specific topic at university, not a specific subject matter, but is more related to a transversal soft skills, considering global citizenship a transversal soft skills rather than a more a topic related to a precise discipline or topic. So, and considering this global citizenship as a transversal skills that is supposed to be important to every student graduating in this university, similar program exists in many other universities across the globe, I think it's an important step forward. To do so concretely is also important to try to allow the students to experience what global citizenship is. Because the main risk is that global citizenship rests on theoric, abstract idea which one can learn and agree with, but with no real sense. So the real challenge is how can we create the learning condition for students to experience somehow the global citizenship. In fact, according to research, there are many research, including some research I've done by myself, that to teach global citizenship education at every level, at every age, what is more important is try to move bodies and to create real physical contacts instead of just being too theoretical. And in this case, we try to ask us to use two different strategies, concrete strategies. One of them is following the Paulo Freire inspired approach of the theater of the oppressed. So use the theater of oppressed as a teaching activity to allow students to somehow experience some of the issues related to the global citizenship competencies. This is one of the things. Another one is to create a close cooperation with some of the civil society organizations working in the territory, because civil society organizations are committed toward the project in cooperation and development with the Global South, so they can allow our students to have concrete experience to a real encounter with the other and with the implication of the North-South development discourse, etc., etc. So try to create service learning or internship experiences for our students with a strong cooperation with once again, with the territory, with the civil society organization in the territory and the local authority.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I think the most symbolic but also important one have to give voice to the students. So we are thinking of having, not just thinking, we are organizing and constructing the possibility to have a representative body of students inside the City Council, or at least in commissions which are part of the City Council. Because we really want to, there are so many students in Bologna, we really want them to feel that we are part of our citizenship. So I think this is one of the things we are constructing in this moment. And among the many ones, we have programs together with schools, especially for secondary schools. And then, of course, we have programs with university and internships which deal inside and outside there. But I want to mention one which I think is very important. We deal with students in prisons, and we have programs together for them and also associations. And this, I think, has been a good experiment, seeing people who can study there. And also we have art and theater. And I think we are also trying to develop this idea of students, not only in Bologna, but international students here. And again, I'm sorry, I repeat them many times, but the question of refugees students is not so obvious because there are a lot of bureaucratic things to follow with the. So we have with them, give them facilities, open spaces, and so on. And we have also awards for students, high school, higher education, concerning, for instance, new citizenships. We are also trying to host students coming from different backgrounds and different communities, and we always insist that we are the same community. So I don't know how to express them. People coming from different experiences, and also we have again a word for concerning art and culture, which are very important. And I think the most symbolic one will be the idea of having the representative of students as a board inside the City Council or inside a commission, the City Council, so that really they feel part of this political body of the town. Thank you.
Thanks, Rita. I have time for one more question before we break, so could I go to the gentleman back there? You can keep it brief.
So I think it's really important when we're thinking about international or global education that we reflect upon the fact that for most of the systems that graduates are still a minority of the population. And in democratic systems, that's always going to mean that if there's a democratic deficit, between the globally educated graduates and non-graduates, then you're going to get Brexit. And that's exactly what we saw in Brexit. Sorry, I didn't say who I was. My name is Cillian Ryan, Pro-Vice Chancellor from Nottingham Trent University, but as you may gather by my accent, Irish by origin. So the point is that if we are not engaged as universities within our local communities and being able to bring, in a sense, that graduateness and that engagement right throughout the city which we're based, we are going to get that democratic deficit. And I suppose my observation, particularly in the UK, or particularly, I should say, in England, is that many of our universities are not very closely engaged in those communities because students are coming, the vast majority of students are coming from outside the city. They're very much stuck in a student ghetto. They tend to drive resentment amongst local populace, and they leave. And that's very different from some other communities that I know. I suppose Australia and Ireland would be two examples. I guess it varies then to varying degrees across countries. Queen's obviously must have some of these issues, whereas U of T and Toronto Metropolitan are in different situations. So I suppose I would just invite us to reflect upon the extent to which our universities are engaged, both as students and our research and our involvement in the communities of our cities, and whether we generate, in a sense, whether we overcome that potential democratic deficit.
Great. Thanks very much. Any comments on that? Should we pick it up?
Well, just a very short comment, because there's no question. Is an important question to be raised. Just to comment this how crucial is this question. This issue is also addressed by the recent report by UNESCO, when they say that universities as a system could be at the same time a way for include and exclude. So it could be an important way for inclusion of many diversity, minorities, etc. As I said, so the global using global citizenship education approach in the university as a vision could be a way for including. But at the same time, one of the risks is that university could create barriers for the inclusion of students. And in fact, the number of graduates is an issue within the nations, because there is a class divide within the nation, but especially is an issue within nations, because some esteems see that in the next 20 years, the most developed country in the north could reach easily the 100% of graduate or youth people, while in the south the gap which is already existing, a gap between the north and the south. This gap is going to expand in terms of the number of graduates between the north and the south. So this is another issue that could be addressed not only at the national level, at the community level, at local level, but also at the global level, because there's a huge gap, an expanding gap between university in the north and the south, even in terms of the number of graduate people and the gap between graduate and non-graduate people. So it's an absolutely crucial question for national, local community, and internationally.
Raffaella has a brief but very weighty and penetrating comment. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. Just a very tiny example of something which happened here in Bologna, which brings together what Massimiliano and what Rita were saying. When the Ukrainian conflict started back at the end of February, we actually had a very large number of our students wanting to helping out the city. So we had hundreds of refugees from Ukraine suddenly arriving in Bologna. And our students volunteered extremely quickly, and I think in a very generous way, to helping out in the hubs that the city was establishing. So they actually were there translating, explaining what vaccinations, for instance, were about, helping out kids, helping out in the schools, and so on and so forth. So that was a very quick and very good examples of having students which we educate to global citizenship, having a very strong collaboration on a daily basis with the city, and having the former helping out in being engaged with Bologna on the other side. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks, Raffaella. An excellent point. So we are going to break. So can I suggest, we're about 10 minutes late going into break, can I suggest that we reconvene at 10 minutes past 5, and then we'll pick it up because many of the same themes will be raised by Rita's presentation, and we'll go directly into hearing from her. So that'll be in about, let's say, about 20 minutes or 25 minutes.
10 past 5.
10 past 5. Yeah. Oh, and the refreshments are to be had, Carla, just out here. First floor, out that door.
Okay. You get very bored of my presence.
Again, if you wouldn't mind taking your seats, we'll resume the program. So thank you very much, everybody. The remainder of the program will run until just before 6 o'clock, and we have one more presentation, this from Rita Monticelli, from whom you heard earlier on.
Sorry.
Rita spoke earlier on in her capacity as councillor of the city of Bologna, and also bringing messages to this group from the mayor of Bologna. Now I'll introduce her to you as an academic colleague. She is a full professor in the University of Bologna, where she teaches gender studies, feminist theories between difference and diversity, English literatures and literatures in English, post-colonial theories and cultural history, and she's published widely in those fields. She's participated in European projects on intercultural women's studies, cultural memory in Europe, the intersection of the humanities and the sciences, gender and the culture of equality in Europe, and in networks for the promotion of gender equality and inclusion. And I could go on at length, but I'm going to hand over to Rita, and she will make her presentation, and we hope there will be some time at the end of it to have a conversation before we conclude at 6 o'clock. Go ahead, Rita.
Thank you so much. Sorry to be here again. I hope you don't get bored by my presence. I'm doing my best not to do that. So thank you. Thank you, Professor Dean. And I will start with some questions. The attacks against academic freedom in many parts of the world and the material consequences for our colleagues. The attacks we have seen in Europe and all over the world to gender, feminist, queer, transgender, and transsexual subjects. The disruption and violence towards human people's rights, the censorship to the right to speech, to express thoughts critically, to produce knowledge that does not respond to the political view of the country, the thousands of people in prisons, tortured for their activism for a better inclusive society, for having supported the underrepresented voices, subjects who are not yet included in the deeper structure of the social orders, the regressions of women's rights in many countries, the killing of black people, gender violence, feminicides, LGBTQI+ dismissal and violence against, old and new forms of racism, anti-Semitism, the non-recognition of diversity as a source of cultural, political, and social wealth, the imprisonment of young scholars studying and engaged in the so-called minority, non-universal subjects, so to speak. Some of the epistemic and material violence I've mentioned covered my emergency wars in the past, and today by the pandemic disaster and the devastated current wars. I was asking myself, have all of them something to do also with academic freedom and the task of the universities today? Talking about university and the document that unites universities toward the same goal, the Magna Charta, for instance, involves rethinking the role of the university and the role of the intellectual, both teachers and students, as a collectivity, and their relationship with the world that includes them. Let me start from an article by Edward Said, published in the 90s of the last century, still and more than ever useful, I think. In the 90s, the US, when Said gave the lecture, The Potentate and the Traveler, the debate was whether to aim at transmitting and recreating a sort of new universal, so-called traditional and classical knowledge, perceived as more aseptic and foundational of the human formation, or rather to engage in civil debates and movements carried out inside the academia by the so-called minority groups, referring, for instance, to research areas such as gender studies, women's studies, oral history, popular culture, black studies, civil studies, including the history of slavery, of the Holocaust, of imperialism, gender and race, not only as thematic issues, but also as interpretative methodologies. So that would have made the sovereign academy too concrete, therefore too political. What is at stake here is whether the university is meant to engage intellectually with significant political and social change, with improvement in the status of minority populations, with abuses of power and lapses in the construction and perpetration of the social order, or rather if the academy is still perceived as a socially different, privileged side super partes. The problem is to a certain extent faulty, since in order to redefine the role of the university in society, it would be necessary to revisit the very notion of knowledge, identity, freedom of academy itself, of the academia itself. In Said's view, the public role of the intellectual is that of the outsider, the amateur, and disturber of the status quo. According to Said, one of the tasks of the intellectual is thus his effort to break down the stereotypes and categories that limit and repress human thoughts and communication. This vision overcomes the idea of the university communities as sites where people are educated either as reformers or revolutionaries, according to their engagement with establishment power or peripheral counterpowers. The metaphor of the exile and marginal to indicate the intellectual signal the necessity of a certain freedom from external pressure, as well as the assumption of a dissident language that, and I'm quoting Said, would speak the truth to power. Accordingly, academic freedom is not impartiality or distance from the world, nor a license for entirely do as one likes. Rather, it could be considered as a form of dissident epistemological repositioning. The intellectual must not be held in thrall to the authority of the national identity. The very essence of the intellectual life is about to be critical and concerns the formation of a critical thought. Criticism is intellectual life, whose essence can never be submitted nor dismissed by anything and anybody. Rather than viewing the search for knowledge as a search for coercion and control over others, we should regard the knowledge as something for which, I'm quoting again, to risk identity. Accordingly, academic freedom as well as civil engagement could be envisaged as an invitation to renounce identity in the hope to assume at least to understand more than one. Raymond Panikkar, historian of religion and interculturalism, states that it is impossible to get out of one's own identity mythologizing without the intercultural contribution, the recognition of the uncanny interdependence of all beings. Therefore, interculturality has to do with academic freedom. It's not an inevitable dialogue in a world in movement, but also, and above all, a deconstruction and re-elaboration even of one's own collective, nationalistic, absolutized mythology. If the modern world has rightly revitalized the cosmology of other culture, it has then absolutized its own universal knowledge. The Bonn Declaration of 2020 on academic freedom in research and other related institutions take a stand against the interference of politicians and governments with research and academic researchers. I'm quoting, research that must be independent and be free from undue external influence of any kind, as independence is indispensable for excellent research, a research-based teaching. End quote. It is all the more critical at a time when research and teachings are being challenged on ideological grounds and distorted and undermined by the external ideologists, organizations and associations, and some kind of populism and political parties that deny the evidence of fact, deny the right to people for their own identity, sexual orientation, and so on. Some researchers are now in danger, and many dissident scholars are at risk. Some faculties, especially in the humanities, are disappearing or are under attack in Europe. We may think of, for instance, gender studies closed, for instance, in Hungary. Some attack to what is called Islamo-Gauchism in France. And even in Italy, yes, when the so-called gender theory has ideologically attacked academic freedom, not to mention schools and inclusion education processes. As workers in the academy, we register with concern that threats to academic freedom, because they are increasing in many countries around the world, including some countries in the European Union. In many states, academic freedom is in acute danger, with academics being restricted in their work, persecuted as opponents of the regime, or even detained. Many academic communities have committed to continue and intensify effort within its organizations to provide protection and prospect for endangered academics from abroad, and to actively participate in programs and networks such as Academy in Exile or Scholar at Risk, we will see tomorrow. We should demand politicians to refrain from polemics and attacks against disciplines, subjects, or researchers. As if researchers in the scientific field must be accountable for the quality of the research, not for their personal values or beliefs, students must be offered the widest possibility of diverse disciplines and critical positions for their formation and be able to share critical thinking and contribute to a better future. Any ideological attack, discrimination, and defamation by national authorities, governmental institutions, or political people against academic subjects and researchers should be rejected as abusive behavior against academic freedom. In this light, academic freedom must be vigorously and decisively protected by all institutions, and all universities should be united for this scope. In the field of humanities and social science, everywhere, as academics, we should denounce all ideologically motivated attacks on academic fields ranging from gender studies, Black studies, post-colonial studies. I'm here quoting Jan Palmowski of the Guild University Associations. Also from transgender, feminist, queer studies, because their disappearance would signal not only a political erasure, but a diminution of epistemological and material richness. Today, perhaps universalism could be substituted and expressed as a transversal alliance, because academic freedom should safeguard and protect not only contextualized values, but also minority cultures as an essential part of academic freedom, valuing cultural differences. The academia should above all protect human rights and transversal alliances that must cross over nations and states. They should be safe spaces that safeguard diversity and inclusion, protecting all subjects from hate speech, violence, harassment, and all kinds of discriminations, political and cultural. A space where academic debate can proceed freely without fear of personal attacks, violence, harassment, and hate speech and abominable attacks. In this light, the relationship between university in a global world that we have just heard from Professor Tarozzi, global citizenship, as discussed here, can be elaborated also through the notion of globalization, a globalization may be reframed within new forms of humanisms, overcoming the dichotomy between human and non-human, as Professor Tarozzi was saying, human and post-human, and must keep in cultural memory the massacres and genocides derived from the humanization of the so-called others, both in the Western and Eastern social orders. Global possible humanisms should face the challenge of overcoming inequality in gender identities, ethnical and class ones, where consensus must substitute blood and the mere biological elements in definition of one's own belonging. In the interconnection, for instance, between globalization and migrations, migration cannot be seen as an homogeneous phenomenon. Acknowledging diverse forms of migration implies redefining laws and norms that regulate nations and states, as well as participation in the political governmental systems to the extent to redefine what human rights imply and are. Migration should also be analyzed within political and cultural systems between global and local systems, as we were saying. According again to Raymond Panikkar and Zygmunt Bauman, although in diverse cultural contexts, the recognition of a community is sterile when it is not accompanied by redistribution of the resources and the rethinking of the entire social and political order. The new strategy of power and dominance is based on the politics of disengagement or the politics of excess, which seduces by going against rules and norms. The role of the intellectual is thus the construction of an intercultural community, whether it is an academic, a media celebrity, a government expert, or otherwise, and could refer me a fundamental quality, courage and radicalism, as is her method. The intercultural global community model proposed by Raymond Panikkar and to a certain extent envisaged by Bauman begin with a critical and mobile interrogation, very simple but very crucial. According to which experience and form of humanity do we want to live? The recognition of cultural varieties is only the beginning, not the end of intercultural question. It is the beginning of a difficult political route, consisting of dialogue and negotiation aimed at a shared and commonly decided goal. But we will not reach this accord if we start from unequal position of superiority or inferiority. Hence, we also need to decolonize global citizenship education. An important intervention in our effort should be to create and sustain more inclusive and liberating platform of knowledge and learning. Lived experiences of migration challenge the constructed borders, which derive from colonial and imperial restructurings of the contemporary world and nation states. The construction of an alternative world which acknowledges equality, justice, and common humanity of all with social and natural environments must take into consideration also the existing wars, terrorism, poverty, imbalance of power and wealth before being able to address the utopia of a communal world. This is the task of the university. Are our students Patrick Zaki and Ahmed Samir's two stories that involve the task and fate of the universities? Two destinies against academic freedom and activism. Should the murder of Giulio Regeni be an incessant request of justice on the side of the university? Can we talk about global citizenship keeping apart from this failure to protect our researchers? Is it possible to separate the university from its context? Can we act on behalf of sovereign principles transgressing borders and nations? Or are we talking in an Eurocentric way, not respecting diverse cultures and traditions? What is the limit between freedom of research and expression and respect for other views? Is the question of censorship faced by our universities? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights can be an important answer. States the recognition of an inherent dignity and equal and unalienable rights of all members of the human family. And this is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. The Article 3 says, everyone has the right to life, liberty, and security of person. Article 5, no one shall be subjected to torture or to cruelty, inhuman or degrading treatment of punishment. The same is recalled by the Convention Against Torture and other cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment for the General Assembly Resolution 1984, United Nations Human Rights. We know the story of Patrick Zaki and Bologna. Patrick Zaki is a student of the university, registered in the Master in Gender and Women's Studies. By now, he's part of our community, a friend and a citizen of our Bolognese collectivity. Having chosen a master in the field of the humanities and having obtained an European grant, has made Patrick an Egyptian citizen, also an Italian and an European student, without barriers between countries and among disciplines. Fostering academic freedom is one of the educational aims of the Master in Gender and Women's Studies he attends, where the issues related to gender, gender fluidity, theorization, family genealogies, the importance of culture, literature, and art for critical thinking are connected to single identity, not to single identity, but to a sort of intercultural learning. We could recognize this, the culture of this, as tools to deconstruct and possibly reconstruct the symbolic and social order for everyone. Patrick Zaki was imprisoned the 7th of February 2020, waiting for a trial with continuous postponement of hearing, no possibility for him to defend himself. Lack of proofs, waiting in prison, deprived of his own rights, his studies, his dear ones, his life. The press reported that he was tortured on the first day of his arrest, kept in condition of physical deprivation. December the 8th, 2021, he was released from prison, free to stay with his family in his town, but not released from accusations. Postponements of the hearing started again. Patrick is not free. He is out of prison, waiting to resume his studies, his life. He cannot travel, he cannot do research for his master's degree. The university was and is an example of defense of human rights defenders, organizing network, motions, and events to support him, to ask for justice, for a fair trial, and then to ask for freedom. The massive attention of the world towards his case, citizens, students, artists, singers, has supported also Patrick's hope to resist and hope to be released. The alliance between the city and the alma mater was and still is a virtuous reinforcement of a communal commitment not only for our students, but also for human rights, freedom of expressions, of speech, and the shared request for justice, and finally for freedom to enable our students to be back to their studies. Then there was a new various accusations, was accused of calling for the overthrow of the state, using social media to undermine the social order, and then the accusation, an article written and published on a magazine on discrimination towards the Coptic community in Egypt. This is the press, this is what reported the press. Patrick himself does not deny to have written this article, but he defends the right of freedom of expression. The right is particularly important for researchers, scholars, journalists, as we have seen, and other people working in the media and in the field of culture in general. Salman Rushdie experienced Docet in an important example. This right states that people must be free to criticize the government and our public institution without fear of prosecution. This is vital, and is a vital feature of a democratic society. And I quote the Human Rights Act. Everyone has the right to hold opinions without interference. Everyone has the right to freedom of expression, and so on. Solidarity enacted toward patriarchy by the university is part of the academic freedom and speaking the truth to power, and as a practice of social justice in a global frame, because Patrick is a global citizen. Solidarity enacted towards scholars and students at risk at university is part of that academic freedom and speaking the truth to power. Solidarity is an indispensable tool to envisage new forms of citizenship through a reconsideration of crucial issues such as human rights, gender equality and equity, sustainable development, poverty, global justice, freedom and peace. A political philosopher, Fred Dallmeyer, reminds us that the link between freedom and solidarity implies a shift from the Western world perspective to a global and cosmopolitan constellation in which the polarity between self and outside world is overcome. Solidarity, an element as structural as equality and fraternity, can become a fertile ground for cultivating and rethinking the role of the academia. Judith Butler revisits precarity and vulnerability as possible starting point for reconsidering the relationship between ethics, proximity, and distance. Building on Hannah Arendt and Emmanuel Levinas, Butler interrogates otherness and the self in the continuity of their uncanny structural proximity. Even more than friendship, solidarity is alliance in times of crisis. It is coalition against injustice. It is resistance and political education. From this point of view, solidarity is not an attitude of benevolence, but a socio-political choice and conduct. Cultivating intercultural practices of reciprocity means recognizing ontological pluralism, that is, the multiple forms of our beings in the world and of others being in it. Solidarity is far removed from the rhetoric of tolerance, which remains profoundly hierarchical. It is a practice of social action that defends community against hegemonies, dominations, and genocides, cultivating collective responsibility and preserving diversity. This is the profound meaning of the Magna Charta. The link between academic freedom and solidarity, fostering culture of plurality and subjectivity, transgression and national identity, is our engagement to demand for justice for all our students at risks. But who has the responsibility for freedom? Who has to fight for freedom? Is it up to those who enjoy this right of which freedom consists of? I would like to quote Susan Sontag in front of the images of the Holocaust and the images of tortures of the Abu Ghraib prison. Now that we know, we have the responsibility. It's not about to blame, but about the unceasing work of memory and post-memory to maintain or arrive to the right of freedom. And now we know about our students. And now we know about Patrick Zaki. And now we know about Giulio Regeni. And we are still waiting for justice. We know and we cannot keep silent. What is the role of the university in this process toward justice? Should and must the university protect its researchers and request justice until it is achieved? What is the role and the task of the intellectual here? I believe that among the most powerful, direct or devious enemies of right, and in particular the right of freedom, are precisely ideological discrimination or uncritical populisms. Let me quote Costa Dusinas, and I'll end in his book, The End of Human Rights, 2000. He makes an important connection between human rights, legality, and contemporary feelings of dislocation and alienation. Human rights have lost the ideological battles of postmodernity, and at the same time, I'm quoting him, we confront a paradox, since the increased respectability of human rights at the level of political and legal discourse has accompanied the most atrocious acts of human barbarity. There is a huge gap that threatens to separate theory and practice, one which endangers popular reason and skepticism. But I want to end with a sentence concerning the possibility, because there were many things, but I leave space for discussion. When the apologists of pragmatism pronounce the end of ideology, of history or utopia, they do not mark the triumph of human rights. On the contrary, they bring human rights to an end. The end of human rights comes when they lose their utopian end. So it means that utopia, it is an horizon to tend to, and we cannot give up the principle of hope, which is to sustain our university networks, our horizon, our perspective, our commitment. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Rita. I have to say that last point is a very uplifting point. I think if we don't believe in the utopian drift of the work we do, there's no point doing it. So I thoroughly support you in your thinking. I'm interested in discussion amongst members of the group. Perhaps I could begin by just going back to a point you made, which was a really thoughtful point about migration, in which you, I think, said, this will be my paraphrase, that inclusion is not real unless it involves a redistribution of resources, right? So an important question that institutions have to wrestle with when they address this question is the transformation of themselves. So these institutions, particularly in the Western tradition, have a very closely defined or sharply defined identity, but the more inclusive they become, the more they have to change. Do you have any reflections on the capacity? We're talking about identity at one point, interestingly, and my experience is that even the best intentions run up against a sense that there's something inviolable about certain ways of doing things. You might call it a Eurocentric epistemology and so on. Does that get in the way of your utopian thinking?
I coordinate the Center for Utopian Studies in Bologna, so invited me to very important things I believe in. I think that I would like to start from your first remark, which is, I think, to me is very important. And I think you are addressing in a way the difference between multiculturalism and interculturalism. When I say distribution of wealth and distribution also political possibility of decision, while multiculturalism deals with different communities which are separated the one from the other, maybe the question of safety rises, because when you are invaded by the other is something which, trigger your reaction. Interculturalism means exactly the distribution of political possibility to decide, distribution again of money, and again the right to have citizenship and the right to be part of the same community with differences, respecting differences. Of course, we know that the roots are very important. Tradition, where you come from, is very important, but we also give importance to where we want to go. Identity is where you come from, but also where you want to go. Yeah. And this is part where you want to go together toward this destiny. And I was thinking when Massimiliano Tarotti was talking, a definition of nation. When I was studying at school, at university, sorry, I remember the first sentence of a book about Britons, and the first sentence by Linda Colley was, each nation was born against the other. Yes. And so we consider border artificial. We have different history, but we consider also transgressing border as something part of this process of intercultural, global, not only citizenship, but education. And yes, I think that the question of utopia, thank you, because I think that we use utopia in a very bad way. They say, oh, this is utopian. But utopian has a very strong tradition. We know at the university very well, a strong tradition, Thomas More, and all the tradition of criticizing the society we live with, not just to criticize it, but to construct a better one. So we talk about concrete utopia. So the possibility we see today, the seeds of the principle, the seeds through which we can work to achieve a better future, the principle of hopes by Ernst Bloch. And the question of utopia has a lot to do with hope, not just as a feeling, but as a position you take.
Thanks, Rita. Excellent point. It's about action. Yes, we have a couple of hands up at the back. Thanks. you raise your hands again? So there you go.
Thank you. My name is Riviok Lusvam, and I come from the University of Greenland, and I'm also the chair of the Human Rights Council of Greenland. And I wanted to come with some few comments here, so it's going to be a little tiny bit long, sorry. Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Firstly, we just had a bit of a scandal in Greenland where one young student, or a young woman, wanted to study in Canada. But in order to do that, to get a scholarship, she had to prove that she was an Inuit. And Inuit, we span all across the Arctic, all from Greenland all the way to Chukotka in Russia. But the difference between our brethren in Canada and Alaska is that we do not get dog tags in Greenland. So we do not get numbers, we do not have to prove our indigeneity, and we have become part of the UN Declaration of Indigenous Peoples' Rights, wherein Article 33 says that we, indigenous people, have a right to determine our identity as indigenous people.
Yeah.
And because of that, the government of Greenland did not give her this declaration of identity that she could use to study in Canada. And that brought up this huge issue of identity, and should we be able to declare ourselves as indigenous. And there was this huge debate in Greenland because some people said it would lead to a new form of fascism or Nazism, because then we would have the Greenlandic people. We are a nation of a lot of different people, not only ethnically Inuit. And what would happen then? Our university was able to engage to come with the legal grounds for this, so people could have that as the fundament for the huge debate that was going on, that is still ongoing. It came out a few days ago, this article. But this showcases that not only globally, the academy still has not decolonized. We are still extremely colonial in the way that we work. So we need to readdress the issues of how do we give scholarships?
Exactly.
How do we ensure that people can get the scholarship without breaking the Article 33 of UNDRIP, for example? Then we came to the fact that, okay, what other things because now we come to the former talk you had about the global, the local, and the national. And in Greenland, we are Greenlandic, but our citizenship is Danish because we're still technically colonized, but not, because Denmark managed to do some magic back in 1953. But what makes it interesting is, for me personally, when I'm in Denmark, I don't speak Danish. I speak it fluently, but I take advantage of the fact that I look Asian so that they will treat me better. Because as soon as they realize that I am Greenlandic, they start to treat me in a very, very vulgar manner. And that just showcases the racism and the colonial mindset is still extremely alive, and that I, as an individual, had to switch off and decide to blend in and to kind of assimilate. And that showcases how important it is for the university and me as a researcher to showcase this so that we can do something about it. So that's why I agree that the humanities are extremely important in showing how the world looks right now and how we can change it for the better. Another thing that I want to come into, because now I want to take advantage of all the people listening, indigenous people all over the world are the ones who are most likely to be taken advantage of, especially indigenous women. Sexual abuse is extremely high, and we already know, unfortunately, in the academy, sexual abuse happens because of the hierarchy And because historically we have men at the top of the positions. So we need to also be careful of how we act with the indigenous people, because the statistics are saying that more and more indigenous women are joining us now. And we need to ensure that when they do come, that they'll be able to speak up when they experience what they're gonna experience. And I say that because it will happen. Unfortunately, the numbers speaks for themselves. And to ensure that we can stop it from happening. So we need some mechanisms because the system isn't working. And that is something I want to invite everyone to talk about, because it's very difficult to change a system when you are already a part of it. Even as an indigenous person, I myself have difficulty with trying to come up with solutions. So I'm very grateful to be here. So those were my comments, and I hope to hear more from you during the coming days.
Can I just say thank you? Thank you so much for your comments, your reflections. I think that you brought along a point which is crucial in humanities and also in the definition of human rights, the right to identity and the right to express it and the right not to be subsumed within a sort of homogeneous melting pot elements. And also what you were saying about violence, denying the possibility, the right to identity is a violence against yourself, against the community. And at the same time, you were also addressing the question of violence against indigenous women especially. And thank you for also raising this issue, which is extremely important now. We have seen attacks towards women in general, their rights. I don't want to quote the many violations they are assisting now, but saying that indigenous women are more attacked than other women, I think is crucial, because we should approach this issue within an intersectional way. Talking about women in general with the capital W erases the history of repression and different histories which are there and very important to be acknowledged. That's what we should do in the humanities, we should do in our university. That's why I was claiming that so-called minority disciplines are still very important. And we were also in Bologna, I want to testify that there is a lot of work on violence, against violence, gender-based violence, and also we have, unfortunately, also here in Italy, a lot of feminicides. And again, although it is a transversal phenomenon, it is true that there are certain kind of feminicide which are due to different elements. So we have to deal with them urgently, but recognizing the context. So, and inside university, I think we should do many, many more courses, transversal courses for students, for teachers, for everybody to be aware of what you were saying. And sorry, I know it's unpopular, but to make them compulsory. I think it's very important to make them this way. Thank you for your reflections.
Thanks very much. It might be helpful for us to have a conversation about Canada and these identity issues in the next couple of days, because I do have some information for you on that. My read of it is we could take 2 more questions, so please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Marta Žuvić. I'm coming from University of Rijeka as a vice rector. Oh. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you, Professor Monticelli, for such a nice lecture. I would just want to ask a question, maybe in more engineerial manner due to my scientific background. So I would say, at least in Europe, we observe a strong correlation between material wealth, let's say GDPR per capita, then the level of the democratic values that are lived in those communities, and level of human rights that are cherished, and the level, third, of the academic freedom, which is given to academia. So those 3 are really strongly correlated, but correlation doesn't say anything about cause-effect. Could you identify any elements of cause and effect between the 3? Or after this comment from a colleague, I would say, do we really live democratic values at such a high level, or it's just hypocrisy? Thank you.
I think that your question was an answer. I'm sure that it was a sort of understatement. Well, I don't have a proper answer for that, but I think that there are transversal issues concerning academic freedom or freedom in general, or possibility to access to knowledge that are transversal and which are specific. So when you were saying freedom, academic freedom, these three levels you were relating together, I think one of the main issues is how to make theory and practice concrete and to give it space and voice in society. So to me, what we are trying to do in a utopian way is really to make projects together. You are from the scientific so-called hard sciences. What we are trying to do, for instance, now in order to empower women is to for instance, in Italy, to invite them to choose STEM disciplines. Of course, this requires another important thing, that jobs are more paid in the scientific world than to be educators or of teachers. So it's again a way we have to be treated it in a very complex way. And one of the reasons why we have to do that is the university cannot be an apart world, but can really work with the regions, with the civil society, with politicians, maintaining this idea of freedom of research. I think that I want to add something on the declaration of academic freedom that doesn't want to have interferences from the outside world, is sometimes we talk too much about the impact. But if we talk too much about the impact and we don't talk about involving from the very beginning the underrepresented voices, again, the impact is something which doesn't allow for imagination, vision, which is a part important of our research. And sometimes failure can also conduct us somewhere else, which may be more interesting than what we have strictly planned. I don't know, I know it's not an answer, but it wasn't a question, but thank you for your reflection through the idea of a question. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks, Rita. Thanks for the question. So we do have one more question, if it can be brief.
There are two people.
Please.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure it can be brief, but I will do my best. I'm Milica Popovic, and I'm currently leading Global Observatory and Academic Freedom at a Central European University in Vienna. And I'm really honored to be here thanks to our wonderful partnership with the Magna Charta Observatory. So I will also use just briefly this opportunity, since we are a very new initiative, to invite everybody present to look into the work that we have been producing in the last about 1 year, and especially the report we have produced on the global situation regarding academic freedom in 2020 and 2021. And we have witnessed certainly a lot of interesting developments both in the research and policy worlds. I also wish to thank everybody here, and especially you, Professor Monticelli, for all the contributions which have been extremely valuable. And maybe just to put two questions on the table for further reflections. It is extremely important, especially at the Global Observatory, where we try to approach the question of academic freedom from a conceptual point of view and further the scholarly research, or what is exactly the academic freedom and where does it stand in this panorama of human rights? What is the tension with the freedom of expression and freedom of association and representation, and what is specific in it, for many being used to say actually that this is a privilege for academics, but this is exactly where also the responsibility stands, that we as scholars engage with society, and that's why academic freedom is crucial and essential for the world of research and teaching and learning. And this is what needs to be kind of underlined, why academic freedom in itself is a specific right within this whole world and environment of human rights, of course. And what is really important also, many have been already kind of mentioned, the question of redistribution of resources, the issue of wealth has been raised, certainly rightly so. So I would just add, in addition to these extremely important issues that have been raised, and which definitely is crucially intersectional in its own nature and interrelational, so to say, and that is the political economy of academic freedom. There is a crucial structural issue that we are facing as universities and as the research world, and that is continuous taking away of public funding of higher education and research, and especially early career research, further and further being led to precarious status. And then we pose the question of epistemic injustices as the concept of Nuranda Fricker. So what is also the academic freedom for researchers, teachers, lecturers, members of academic community having very different statuses? We usually link academic freedom to tenured scholars. We do underline that tenure is essential for the exercise of academic freedom. And yet we are facing the world in which researchers, especially the early career researchers, do not have neither time nor resources to engage with society and to really exercise their academic freedom. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm also part of the Central European University. I work with you. We didn't know each other, but because the master closed in Hungary and he had to be taken to Vienna as part of this, again, attack against gender studies and women's studies. Well, if I had the answer of what academic freedom is, I think I would be in a better position. But I think it's a very crucial question because it is an open one. If it were a closed one, it wouldn't be academic freedom. I think I also always answer with Said words. It is a relentless erudition, relentless cultural effort to include things we don't know, to include other people, to include, and also taking position. To me, one of the most important sentences I read in this essay is the academic freedom means to tell the truth to power, which sounds as a sort of contradiction, but it is the idea of not being tied to ideologies. And again, the idea of what I was saying, other university is something which is universal, consider universal knowledge as for everybody, or as the university, must university include different cultures, different positions, and so on. So I think it's a continuous rethinking of your epistemological positioning, as you were saying. And of course, I know very well that Bonn Declaration started from the attack of researchers in the field of scientific field, but also we opened it to, in the European Union, to the idea of attacks to so-called minority disciplines. But what you were saying is strictly connected to how can we be free if we don't have the money, if you don't have the resources in order to be free. And so we are also in a way depending on stakeholders in a certain way. So I think that the state should allocate more money for the universities, for cultures. I'm talking about Italy also. And the question of precarity should really be taken under, what can I say, discussed. There are a lot of young researchers, a lot of young students who want to become researchers, a lot of researchers who are still there in a precarious way. In a way, we can also say that they are exploited. And so we need really to have more funds, more money to also to enable them to be free. But the question of money is not just there. The other question is that we really have to do this effort to be open, to understand that we are all interdependent and support each other from other universities. When we were in the European Union, because we were there, discussing the gender equality plan, we could see that, for instance, the word race has a very different meaning, historically speaking, in different countries. And can we construct a sort of academic freedom taking into consideration all these differences? The question of diversity along the history has changed completely its meaning. From being a negative word, now it's becoming a very inclusive one. So I think what we should do is to get together, cultivate a better communication, and work towards good actions, respecting the idea that we are different, but we have to go toward the same goal, especially in this time of wars and difficulties. I know it could be ideal, but it can be done the way we are trying to do that, also together with the same university. So thank you.
Thanks, Rita. So your chair is going to be very firm about ending after this last intervention, because I know we have a colleague who wanted to ask a question just before we broke glass, but out of respect for the folks who have to close up this building, we do need to be out of here fairly soon. But if you could ask your question, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'll be very fast, but still I would like to continue discussion on the issue of violence. As my name is Tamara Ishenka, I'm from Dnipro, from Ukraine, Alfred Nobel University. And I just wonder if we as universities have got the special right, have got the special mission to work for peacekeeping, just not to just to prevent wars, not just to decide and make solution, as we discussed from Bologna universities. Your students just helped Ukrainian women and children to adapt somehow in Italy. But do we have a special mission to prevent wars? And what it should be? I think yes. But what do you think about that? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being with us. I think this is the crucial question, but in order to construct peace, I think we have to rethink the question of knowledge, rethink what your colleague from Canada was saying, rethink the right to identity, rethink the question of borders, rethink the policies. I'm talking about the things I know a bit better, the question of European Union, India, in Italy, rethink our international policies and international politics together. To set up alliances which can really take into consideration what we have said up to now before the global citizenship and everything. And you are asking something which to me is crucial, not just how to prevent a war, but how to stop wars that are there, so the question there, or how to construct a culture of peace. How can we talk about peace in this way? How can we talk while we are also having I use a word of the previous colleague, the question of hypocrisy, when we sell weapons and we talk about peace. It's not a question of being pacifist in a very passive or way, but to construct international sovereign law, rethink treaties, and rethink the geopolitical locations we are in. I think the university, yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think culture is essential. We have to build up, also children now, here we are trying to talk to children in the school about war and about peace, trying to make them, to me, one of the most important instruments, but maybe I'm, what can I say, biased, is also to teach cultural memory. Because sometimes you are bound to repeat things because you have no memory of the past. I always start with an issue with my students saying, with the film, The Secret Life of Words, when they say, how did the Nazi manage to do what they did? And exactly. And the answer of the counselor was, who did remember the massacre of the Armenians? Nobody. So they could carry on with other massacres. So I think it's very important also to keep alive the memory of what has happened in history. There are some mystification, we have to refuse mystification, revisionism, but also really to open up spaces for all these kind of controversial memories, but to see that this is what happens when something like that is carried out. Thank you.
An excellent question to end the session. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much.
My own view is that universities are places where the greatest divisions and disagreements between human beings can and should be settled without violence.
Exactly.
It's a great vision for what we do. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Rita, for doing extraordinary service this afternoon. Thank you, everyone. You're free for the evening. I just remind you, we reconvene here tomorrow at 9. And the formalities, the first speaker begins at 9:30.
I'll give a talk during the dinner. It's not true. It was just a joke. We were going to eat.
Moving from event to event, right?